Yes.
So I'm going to call the special board meeting together to order for August 7th, 2007, and ask for a roll call.
Okay, Kelly?
Here.
Scylla? Here. Meggs? Daphne?
Here.
Morrison?
Here. And I'd like to ask for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
All second.
And that being done, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, open time for public to raise issues not on the agenda or for future agenda items. So seeing none, hearing none, I will move on to number 5, public hearing to consider the annual constructive cost inflation adjustment to sewer connection fees and the option to adopt resolution 17-1533 adjusting the connection fee charges pursuant to section 27 of ordinance 64. Next item, please.
Okay, I'll do a quick introduction on this. So this is a standard business item that the district does typically at the beginning of each new fiscal year. And it is dealing with the adjustment to connection fees. And so when basically in 2013 was the last time the district undertook a major study and updating of its connection fees. At that time they had been untouched for maybe a couple of decades almost. There was a substantial update. A study, evaluation study was produced in association with that, and it established the new connection fees for the district. And then as part of that update, a mechanism was put in place, which is essentially identical to the same basic process that many of the other local agencies, including San Rafael Sand District and CMSA and Sand District 2, all basically follow the same procedure, which is each year you look at the average construction cost inflation, and that's what we use is what's called the engineering news record, or the ENR, CC&I. And think of that as sort of the equivalent of the COLA, except it's for the inflation index, except it's specifically for construction. So it's reflective of capital project costs and so forth. And the idea is that we want to update the connection fees each year at a minimum. We want to update them to reflect any inflationary trends, because what people are, when you pay a connection fee, you're not paying for the ongoing service. That is covered in the rates. What you are paying for with the connection fee is you're basically buying into the capital investment that's already been made, in terms of building all this public infrastructure. So with all that in this year, what those numbers are very modest. We always look at basically an April, or is it, I guess March or April? March, we do a calendar year, March to March check on the CCI. And then recommend an adjustment based on that. And this year, which is based on looking back from March of 17 to March of 16, we're looking at just a little under 0.5% is the change in the construction cost index. So that is the recommended adjustment to the connection fee going forward for the rest of this fiscal year. And this is one of those items that does require 2/3 vote of the board. And with that, I'll hand it back to the board.
So with that, you're saying the equivalent dwelling unit increase would be about $23 for a
Correct.
new connection fee.
Right, the table attachment A to the staff report has the change. And you can see the two ENR index numbers. And those numbers, by the way, they don't, in and of themselves, that 11,557 and 11,609, they don't really mean anything in and of themselves. They're an index that was created many years ago that they update. But that's where you get the 0.45% change. Then the equivalent dwelling unit change is $23. And the fixture unit change, which would be for like remodels and so forth, it's literally $1 per fixture unit.
Above 23.
Correct, above 23.
Seems very reasonable. Any Comments?
Yeah, I reviewed the connection fee study, and of course, I'm in favor of these adjustments, the annual adjustments, the only fair way to do it. But I think we proposed that we were going to, the first business plan proposed that we were going to review these, right, remember at the end of this year?
Correct.
And the service charge, I think we want to move up the review of the connection fee, because there's a couple things that we ought to do with it. You know, we analyze the value of the facilities, there's lots of ways to do it. One of the things that's not included in this is our cash. And that's a great asset to come into, you know, when you join a club and it's got a big cash reserve, that was put in there by current users. So you got it, not only facilities in the road, but include cash. And then I think there should be, is there a high strength multiplier? Because because there should be a high strength multiplier. It really applies to restaurants in our area. And we charge a kitchen sink 2 plumbing fixture units. And a kitchen sink in a home, they use the sink maybe at most an hour a day. And a restaurant uses their sink like for 8 hours. Do you see what I mean? But they get charged 2 plumbing fixture units.
Is there a different connection fee for businesses?
Yeah, well, no, connection fee, no.
Yeah, there used to be, it was per square foot. Has that changed, or is it plumbing fixture units?
I believe that it is plumbing fixture unit based for both at this point. Now, your high strength in terms of operations and maintenance costs to handle high strength does get applied in the rates. In the rates, we, as you know, we apply high strength multiplier.
But it still should apply in the connection fee too, because they're using there's some level in our collection system. It does apply for treatment for sure.
Well, you remember that we had Ensalada sitting here talking about their bill being $17,000 a year, which seems high.
Well, that's a service charge.
Yeah,
But
I understand.
she actually said it went to 30. Remember that?
From 17.
So I was working with another.
How would we do that,
in
though?
Marin,
How
and
would we
their
do that?
connection fee for the restaurant is, that we all know, is $60,000+ per restaurant.
Would we do that on zoning, or
I can't hear you.
how would we do that? Would we do it on zoning, or would we just apply it
Oh,
to
we don't do zoning.
commercial?
No,
How would we
if it's a
separate it?
restaurant, we could say a high strength factor applies. Or even if it's, well, that's what we do. We could say a high P times 2.34.
But aren't they buying into the system, and then, as Greg said, aren't we covering that extra use with our rates?
Commercial rate.
In other words, we're trying to analyze how much of our system they're using. And if we charge them the same as a home that puts in, that was in the study, it was something like 20 gallons per plumbing fixture unit, something like that. Well, a restaurant uses a heck of a lot more than 20 gallons per plumbing fixture unit. You see? Anyway,
So you're
I
saying
just
we
wanted to make
should buy
that
into the
comment.
system proportionally to how much they're going to use it in the future?
Yeah, that's the way
I mean,
it
I
works.
get that, and then I could also see the argument that the rates, the actual usage is determined by the strength factor and the rates, and so they're getting it there.
They should be in lockstep, shouldn't they? Why would they be different for one than the other? But anyway, the whole point of that is, I would like us to do a connection fee study. We don't have to wait to the service charge.
No, and we did, in terms of the timing that was discussed in the draft business plan, yeah, we were ahead of ourselves a bit on the rate study. We would just be starting to scope that late this fiscal year, but the connection fee was basically done, the work was substantially done in basically middle of calendar year 2013.
Yeah.
So if you just look at that, then as we go into this current fiscal year, probably in the third and fourth quarter of this new fiscal year, we'll want to be scoping and starting to do the work for the new connection fee so that you can act on it going into the new fiscal year. In other words, we are at about the 5-year point on the connection fee already, so it was ahead of the rate study. So we're going to do this, I think, to be clear. Connection fee study will be substantially done in this new current fiscal year. The rate study will just kind of be starting to come up over the horizon, so to speak. We're beginning to prepare for it in this current fiscal year. And the two issues you noted, Tom, things that we want to consider when we're scoping and doing that work would be, what are they buying into in terms of more liquid capital assets? And the second would be, do you make any adjustment to the connection fee based on the type of use being proposed? And those are two things that we can definitely bring into the scope when we begin to work on the connection fee.
Although, one potential problem I imagine is that sometimes the building is not used as a restaurant when it's first connected, and then it turns into a restaurant. For example,
That's
you know, where
right.
Toy Circus used to be on Zenzo Avenue is now the coffee roastery, and so then when that changes, it becomes a little bit of a land use issue.
Or enchiladas, which was a bank.
Bank, exactly.
Right.
And that was, we
one of
don't
the,
really collect from them, you know, we miss that actually.
The connection fee,
Yeah.
right.
yeah, no, that's so how to account for high strength users is not something I've run into before professionally, but it's a good question. I mean, we just have to think about it. One of the limitations of the old fee was it was just based on square footage. To illustrate the point you just made, it didn't really effectively differentiate between a new 20,000 square foot food processing facility and a 20,000 square foot, you know, retail clothing outlet. There was, which have obviously potentially really different loadings. It just said dollars per square foot for a commercial building. So one of the reasons we moved to a fixture unit count based approach is that it moves you somewhat towards what potential capacity demand are you putting on the system. In the water world, drinking water side of this equation, you do that based on the metered size of your connection, because that is what determines how much load I can put on the system. On the wastewater side, we don't really have an equivalent of that. We don't have we don't have a connection size. So we look at fixture unit counts to say, we don't know how many people you're going to have, we don't know how much you're going to do inside that building, but the potential generation of wastewater flows is tied to fixture unit count, because that's your plumbing. So right now, that's the closest we've kind of gotten, but it's something that we can definitely ask those questions in the scoping for the new connection. Yeah.
Well, my suggestion would be that we certainly could look at all of these, but I don't think we need to do it in the next few agenda items. I think this is something we'll find in February.
Now, we'll keep these items
That's
on
what I'm
the,
saying.
Okay.
yeah, Tom, we'll keep these in the scoping for the new connection fee studies, for sure.
So, yeah, but any more discussion? I'd like to move approval of the, what's it called?
Adopt the resolution.
I move approval to recommend the adoption of resolution number 17-1533, adjusting the district sewer connection fees according to the published DNR CCI index.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? No, so it passes unanimously, which is 1 2/3. And item number 6, review and continue the emergency action docket, resolution 17-1532 for the repair of Baywood Court Creek crossing pipe. That was the one that was damaged. Where are we on that?
Yeah, okay, so I'll cover that quickly, and then Catherine Gateman, I can answer any questions. So where we are with that is the board made the initial declaration last month, and the bridge crossing has been stabilized with a temporary timber structure, and you have some photos of, or not some photos, but you have some information in the back of the staff report that kind of shows you what the long-term proposed approach would be to replace that crossing. So where we are right now is we've got Brown Caldwell being contracted to do the design services on the replacement, and Catherine and others have already met with the permitting agencies because this is very much requires both state and federal permits because of the creek tank work that we'll have to do. And we're in negotiations with the property owner, the owner of the Marin Town and Country Club, to get a access agreement in place, because we'll need to bring in eventually construction equipment and so forth across that person's land. There's not other there's not another practical alternative to that right now, so we're in those negotiations. And at this point, we're working to be compliant with the state law on emergency contracting. So what you're doing today is just continuing the emergency declaration. What we're working against is about an October 15th deadline to where we want to be largely out of there in terms of any substantial activity going into the winter. And that's both from a practical, wet season, dealing with wet weather flows and free flows, and then also from the permitting agency's perspective. October is kind of a magic date to be not doing any more activity in the riparian corridors. So when you back up from the October target, we're still under an extremely tight timeline to get the design done by Brown Caldwell, get a contractor in place, and start to get the improvements done. So I guess the point of that is the existence of the emergency is still very, very real, even though things are stable out there. When we given the goal of getting in and out of there before October 15th. So that's where things stand. And
Do you have an idea of cost for the entire
We need
project?
to estimate it.
Between 400 and 600,000. That includes the professional services.
And that's really, I think, this picture, because those numbers, to put this in perspective, and this is, of course, the challenge of doing something like this on a reactionary basis, versus kind of having time to think it through. What we're replacing is essentially as you can see, it's essentially a 70-foot free span of the creek. And so it's a very substantial structure, and what we're trying to put back in place there, if we can, the current solution is one that doesn't involve overhead supports and so forth, because those have a whole bunch of disadvantages. But it is a very substantial structure, as you can see, basically concrete piers at both ends, and about 95 feet of self-supporting freespan pipe, and then geotechnical piers into the ground. And again, this is just kind of a concept rendering, but it gives you a sense of what we're talking about when why this thing has the price tag that it does.
Who's going to do the work?
We haven't selected a contractor yet, Pam, and that is something we'll want to, as soon as we get the design further along, we'll start to reach out to some contractors.
So voting today, we don't have to come back to talk about accepting it because it's an emergency, right?
Correct.
So the 21st, we don't need to.
Correct.
But if you have information.
Yeah, you'll hear about this again no later than the regular September board meeting.
Every month.
Yeah, until it's been completely cleared up.
So is this just a really, I'm sorry, I'm kind of out of it. Is this really an old, were we tracking this pipe or is, I'm kind of curious.
Yeah,
Because that property,
yeah,
it's got,
no,
is ultra sensitive to many different things.
yeah, we're finding that out.
I won't say too much.
No. So it is, of course, these situations are never simple.
I mean, were we allowed to go in to inspect it?
Yes.
Okay.
We've been working with the
Okay.
landlord to be clear, and we are making progress. And it is not a real simple piece of property. So this is an old 14-inch pipe. It used to be the main pipe for that whole chunk of area going up that canyon in the left side of the Cascade Canyon. And so it carried hundreds, if not a couple thousand units. Most of that flow got redirected when improvements got made, and it no longer comes to this pipe. But what you have is, this pipe was built in 1928.
That's
The
fine.
bridge supports are from 1928, 1922. There was a repair done in the 90s.
96, 97, there was a repair.
And what it was is one of the cable supports had compromised, and we came in at that time and just did upgrades to improve the support of the pipe itself. So it's not an idea. To answer your question, we've known about it, but it's just been one of those things to get to. It's a less than ideal situation.
Okay. So what we're going to do, we'll resolve it for another 100 years?
That's what we like.
Yeah.
That's what we like. Yeah. And Catherine and I were talking about that this morning, and so this is a very robust long-term solution, let's put it that way. This will take care of us for a very long time. What we're asking ourselves at the moment here, literally just as
Can we
this
reroute the
develops,
rest of them?
is there a way for us to make a few other changes upstream? Because there's literally 70 homes that are now served by this. So what we'd like to see is if there's any technical feasibility to, in some fashion, reroute those flows on a permanent basis that gets us away from perpetual ownership of an 80-foot clear span creek crossing
Creek cross.
that serves 70 homes. It's a very disproportionate investment in the infrastructure relative to the number of homes served. We don't know that it's technically feasible. The topography up there is very, as you guys know, it's very hilly, and there may not be an easy solution to this, but right now we're kind of suddenly going, let's at least check and see if there are, and we're asking Brown Paul to get a quick spin at that also, at least later on today. So
In which
stay
case we
tuned.
wouldn't do this.
Correct, and what we'd love to find is if there's a longer-term solution that maybe does get us away from this. This is conceptually simple. It's not inexpensive. It will work for the long term, but it's an awful lot of infrastructure for 70 homes.
Okay. So is there,
We could charge them a big connection fee if we're gonna work
Maybe-
and this is all gravity?
Yes, this is all gravity
All
flow.
gravity,
And that's
okay.
just to touch on an example.
Other
There may be
wondering-
some of those homes up there where
Might need
if we
pumping.
offer to pay for ejector pumps or
Yeah,
something, where
that's
we
what I was
could
wondering.
reroute a few flows, hey, if I've got to use $500,000.
That land is really, it's a meadow. And it's wondering,
Do we want to do
climate
that?
change
Right.
and everything, that's why all this new climate change stuff is gonna affect all
Well,
the future of how we're gonna plan.
And this pipe has probably another, along that entire reach of meadow, so maybe 1,000 feet maybe?
1,500.
Has 1,500 feet of pipe upstream of it, which is also 1928, which has got joints every 2 feet. It's a, what we call unreinforced concrete pipe. So that's all infrastructure that we're maintaining, in a sense, in that meadow too, to keep this in place. So the more we're kind of suddenly looking at it, it's like, gosh, it would be nice to be able to actually divest ourselves of some of this and find an easier, quote, a more sustainable long-term way to serve those 70 homes and not have this. So that's going to take us a little bit to figure out, but
Well, and when you have a creek crossing, it just.
Makes everything work.
Everything
Yeah.
is picky and
yeah.
feds and.
So this one's kind of gotten a little, it's becoming a little more complicated, but we're making progress.
I know that you don't have to go through the construction bidding process because it's an emergency, and that's good, because that
Right.
it's a hassle. But I wonder if you could do like a kind of a modified bidding process where these guys can make a pretty good estimate pretty fast, and you don't have to go through all those notifications and this and that, but actually take bids from 2 or 3 selected contractors.
Right.
Is that the plan?
Typically do.
that's good.
We found some recently where people basically just say we're too busy, it's too small, they don't want to. So part of that, we may get people saying no, but we will reach out to.
Okay,
Our goal is to get free quotes.
okay. Oh, that's excellent.
Right.
Sometimes we get no answers.
Yeah.
Can't get through.
Last winter when we had the big rains, the county did receive some FEMA money. Has it completely been spent, or since this is a new event, have we passed the horizon from whence we can ask? This is, I think it would,
Yeah.
public safety, health, safeguard life, blah, blah, blah. Does the county have anything left out of that FEMA money that we could get for this one emergency thing that is truly an emergency and going to protect the health and welfare of all the people downstream starting in October?
My guess is it has to be flood related.
I think that I think the case could probably be made here that the base of that tree that fell over was as a result of that flood.
You may have
That would
to
be
work that
my-
out sooner than 8 months later, though.
No, okay, but this event that occurred here is very current. What I'm saying is, I'm sorry, Pam, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I just told Greg, Garrett Toy is the manager of Fairfax, and he could answer that really quickly, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that and just ask the question,
Yeah.
Michael. Yeah, that's a good reminder on the sort of capturing the emergency damage and the practice of doing that. So when, you know, the FEMA monies, they don't typically come up every year, but more and more with the range of emergency situations you have. You know, if this had occurred at the right time, it was probably a pretty clear connection, but we might have to make a little bit of a, you know, a little bit of a case for it, but let me reach out and find out.
I had made a few calls when I
Yeah.
originally thought about it, and it had to do with the actual event, which was the floods.
Right.
That went.
And the county
The
did
actual-
ask us for input. They asked us to give them, like, did we have events? Now, the time when they asked us, the only thing we had was, we might have just had the Ellsworth, if even that. We hadn't had a lot of damage. And then, as time's gone on, we're kind of seeing more of the results of the winter. So, we'll explore that, so we can find
That's good,
out.
that would save us a lot of money if you're directly, glad you brought that up.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
I forgot to ask, how deep was the, you know, during that flood, how deep was this creek? Was the pipe above the water?
We haven't reviewed the information, we just got some data from the county because Stetson modeled it, and we're trying to get a survey. We haven't lined it up yet, we don't, but the 500-year flood almost stays in the banks right here, so.
Yeah, this particular breach seems to have a lot of capacity. So we don't think it's been a matter of the flows impinging,
Okay.
and
Well,
just
but the
the
flow
nature of.
certainly potentially affected the
Well, Joe, for sure, it's migrated. We think the banks have been migrating with the flow, right? Okay.
How many creek crossings do we have? Do we know?
170.
Do we have any scheduled maintenance on doing that once a year or something like that? Check on those?
With some of them that are potential concern, yes, we do, not all of them, but we've identified that as one of the very specific focuses in the next update to the IMP.
I think it should be, especially the longer ones, but, you know, the creek, any damage to the creek is going to be a real serious SSO, so I think we should get ahead of that. Do I have a motion?
I move that we continue until September the emergency action adopted in resolution number 17-1532 for repair of the Baywood Court Creek crossing pipe.
Don't say that twice. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Do we have any verbal reports for board members? Staff?
We are, well, actually, yeah, this is a little bit timely, I just off the cuff. There's a conversation developing with the CMSA JPA managers crew that ties in with the I&I reduction topic, and the short version is this. As I think the board's aware of, the CMSA committee members have heard about this in the past. So CMSA is in the middle of getting a 5-year update to their what's called their NPDES permit. That is the process that's led to them looking at the conceptual improvements to deal with the wet weather flows, and the decision by the CMSA board a few months back to have an initial response to the regional board that said, we think the no action alternative at the plant is the way we want to go, and start to shift the focus upstream. The regional board has come back and said, okay, we can talk about that, but we're going to have to get a lot more specific about what that means. And if there are going to be commitments that are meaningful to the upstream agencies, because our permit only deals with you, meaning CMSA, what the regional board's looking at doing is what they describe as naming the other agencies. And the purpose for that is that if there's going to be a regulatory commitment to take certain actions, that commitment can't be tied to the agency that doesn't have control of the action, right? So what they're looking at doing is modifying the permit, naming the 3 member collection agencies, and then incorporating some level of information into the future MPDS permit as to what our upstream I&I reduction activities are going to be. And we're meeting, all the managers are meeting with the regional board staff on Friday of this week for kind of an opening dialogue on that. So it's really kind of, it's not an unreasonable or unexpected development. When you say to the regulators, our preferred action is to not fix the plant, it's to go upstream, they're likely to say, okay, tell me what you're going to do upstream. Right?
The plant is already, has a huge capacity, right? Like,
The plant, yeah, and they acknowledge as much in their email communications to the group that they've kind of concluded that putting a bunch more resources into the plant footprint as a solution to the wet weather flows is probably diminishing return. It doesn't make sense.
The
So,
original
The
board
plant
admitted
is-
that?
Yeah.
The original board admitted that?
They make a statement to that effect, yeah.
The plant, while huge, is nowhere near huge enough for 120 million gallons per day, every day,
Correct.
7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, everything we're talking
It's
about.
5 days a year that we have a problem with.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near big enough for 120 million gallons.
Correct. Everything we're talking about is wet weather flows only,
Right.
and no matter how you slice it, that's when things are running kind of at the, at their edge. So it's not a surprise that that conversation's developing, and it's certainly not I wouldn't say it's, say it's good or a bad thing. It's certainly not a bad thing in that we sort of expected, and we've seen this at other regional agencies around the bay. That's the direction things eventually take, which is, okay, let's start talking about what you can do upstream. And then just lastly, we're providing a list of activities that Ross Valley is already doing and where we have planned. They won't be, to my knowledge right now, I can think of, it's all stuff that we're already doing. In other words, so then the permit from them might say, okay, Agency X is going to deploy smart covers to help improve monitoring of I&I. Okay, check the box, we have that.
incentivize lateral replacement.
So the other thing, lastly, and I know we can't go too far with this because it's not agendized, but that discussion has already started to kind of bring in the topic of how do you standardize the approach to laterals within at least the CMSA service area. So that conversation is developing, and that's my report.
That's great.
Hold on.
Just sort of a little bit on that same subject, at the next CASA meeting, apparently there's a working group that's going to be trying to push forward the idea of, instead of a 5-year NPDES permit, to make it a
I
10-year
heard that.
NPDES, and that would be very good because it gives us the ability to
Yeah.
have much better long-term planning.
5 years isn't a long time.
Actually on the CMSA permit request, they made it, remember the submittal was our list of things that we were going to do.
Yes.
There was nothing from the other two agencies. It was just, here's what Ross, for example, and here's
Yeah.
what Ross Valley's going to do. And it was a pretty good list, so.
Yeah.
you know.
That's what we'll be,
I guess-
that's the list we'll be creating.
What we were worried about was getting, making a pledge that we were going to do.
$5 million worth of clarifiers.
Well, yeah, we wanted to avoid half of the share of that $11.4 million clarifier project. But we don't want to pledge $20 million to avoid the $5 million, But
Yeah.
if it's things we're already going to do, that's cool.
That's what we're looking for. Anyway, that's the,
So,
And can we get a copy of that report to the board members?
yes,
The response?
yes. From the regional board, Doug?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll get you guys.
That wasn't a verbal, that was
It's
a written.
just an email, yeah. And actually, I'm happy to send you the email. It's-
When you're on that committee, you're probably going to, it'll be in like a,
Yeah.
well, it isn't the J.
What-
No, it's not the,
Okay, it's the NPD, yes.
What I'll do is that meeting's going to happen in person on Friday of this week. Figure we'll have an informational update on it at the September board meeting. How's that?
Thank you.
so just to recap, so the regional board is, in essence, is going to plan out CMSA's future, whether or not to do more expansion to the plant. Is that
Not
what
so much. They're basically saying, we'd like you, rather than to keep looking at solutions at the plant, like
Right,
building bigger clarifiers, et cetera,
Okay.
we want you to start looking at the upstream collection agencies to how they can actually reduce the flows coming in.
So it'll
And
go
let's put this on the
beyond.
next agenda.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we're getting a little bit too deep into this for right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we should probably not, okay, Mike.
This whole thing came up with part of the permitting process of the blending events.
Right.
And the blending events only happen a couple of times a year. And so our representatives recommended that rather than trying to fix some symptoms that show up as a bigger problem, which is all of our different regions, Santa Fe, Corte Madera, and us, all have old infrastructure with leaking pipes. And if we fix the problem,
I think we're getting a
Yeah.
little off. I think we need to put this on the agenda.
Yeah.
So we'll bring it back with an informational update. It's just a late-breaking thing. It's generally a pretty positive discussion.
Do we have any other agenda items that people wish to put on? Okay, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, you guys.